Oh, there you are, dear listeners. Hey, brush up on your reading, riffing, and arithmetic, because it's time for the Strings and Things podcast. On this show, guitarists come by to change their strings and talk about all kinds of things. After the new strings are stretched out and tuned, they get put through their paces in an exclusive performance at the end of the show. This week, Angela Babin is here with a Gibson that hasn't been out and about in quite a while. She's the uptown girl who's rocked out with downtown groups like the Ordinaires, Homer Erotic, and Alpha Cat. She now plays in Christian Amigos' Gotham Roots Orchestra and creates her own musical projects. She'll tell her host, Patrick Grant, about the strangest place she's ever played a gig and what her dad thought of her musical talent. Let's join Angela and Patrick now and see what's shaking.
For this episode of Strings and Things, we're here today with Angela Babin. Hey, Angela, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Glad to be here.
Well, glad to have you. What kind of guitar did you bring?
I brought my first ever electric guitar, a Gibson Melody Maker from 1963.
Wow. For those of you listening, it's got that sort of reddish mahogany color that's associated with SGs. In fact, the Melody Maker does have a bit of a SG shape.
Yeah, it's a double cutaway, and it's got the original, double pair of single coil pickups, and those are originals. A lot of people, I guess, have put in, and what distinguishes it, I guess, from, I don't know, some other Les Paul Jr. and things like that is the pickups. These are the single coil original ones instead of humbuckers.
Right.
So, this is really the original guitar. When I did get it, when I was 14 years old, I did replace the tuning pegs, but I kept the originals so that if I ever need to sell, I've got the complete vintage package.
Wow. And I'll just be keeping things in Gibson mode with my trusty Les Paul, which has been through a number of string changes on this series, so nothing too new there. But it's glad to hear that we'll have...
a Gibson Fest.
Yes.
And this guitar, I guess it's the counterbalance to your guitar, because this guitar, I think, was created by Gibson to be a student or a lady's guitar because it's so lightweight. Absolutely super duper to carry around New York City, because it is very light.
Well, I do know that, from reading your bio and, of course, knowing you that, it always says, she began playing guitar at age 14. But I didn't know this would be the actual guitar.
This is my number one.
That's your number one.
I mean, I did play, I had a nylon string guitar before that, and I played a little bit of classical and folk and things like that. But this was my first guitar that I played, kind of pop music and in a band with when I was 14 years old.
Is it fair to say that this instrument probably influenced a lot of the ways that you play guitar to this day?
I think so. I think that this instrument, I now perform usually with a Paul Reed Smith. So right. I have two of them. I've got, a solid body, and I have also the semi-hollow body. And I love those guitars, and I love they're extremely reliable and beautiful range of tonality and things like that. This guitar I love, and it's influenced my sound because I veered away from Stratocasters, because I think this kind of presented itself in a different tonality than Strats, and I did have a Strat for a while. Mm-hmm. It was probably the worst Strat ever made. 1973, 3-bolt neck. It was terrible. But anyway, it's a sound that my ear got used to the warmth of this sound, even with the single coil pickups.
Right.
And I think that resonated with me to really go into guitars that have, double pickup, a humbucker, the Paul Reed Smith, and things like that.
So I would suggest that before time slips away, that we start changing our strings.
Sounds good.
Okay, here we go. Well, one of the things I've noticed by having different guests on our program here is that there's many different ways that one can change their strings. Everybody who does it seems to have a method that they prefer. Now me, I'm going to change my strings from the inner moving outwards. Just like I keep, some tension on the neck and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we can just throw these on the floor and give the cats something to think about.
Yes, cats love guitar strings.
Well, I was thinking the other day, how did I meet you?
I think we met through the Composer's Concordance, maybe, or did
I thought they met you through me.
Probably through Christian Amigo?
I think Christian Amigo. I met him at a Mata music at the anthology series, and when I was first putting together this Tilted Axis project in 2011, I put out the word to him. Then I think he suggested you, and then here we are today.
And here we are.
Now I want to take a wild guess here, and with that accent, you might be from this part of the world.
Oh yes.
New York City, right?
New York City, born and bred. Upper West Side, and then public high schools and colleges here.
Do you remember the first music that you listened to or heard that really grabbed you? Just beyond casual listening, hey, I really feel this one, and maybe that took you down the road of you wanted to pursue actually making music. But do you remember that first piece of music that really grabbed you?
I guess I grew up with classical music, so my father was a concert pianist, so piano music was really my ear was listening to that. Mm-hmm. For various reasons, I didn't pursue piano. I did learn how to play a little bit, but then that wasn't continued.
We always have to learn, something as part of a balanced education. It's always good to know how the piano works, how reading music works. Everybody gets that opportunity.
Unfortunately, my reading chops never were fostered. My father was a child prodigy and a concert pianist later, and we had two Steinways. And he would, they were in two different rooms, and we'd play all sorts of games where I'd play whatever with my feet and my nose and my hands, and he'd be able to mimic me perfectly. We played all these crazy games, but, he was forced to practice 6-7 hours a day from when he was 5 years old, when his talent was discovered. So he was extremely lax with me. Mm-hmm. And
right, because he didn't want to put you through that?
Right.
If you're going to be drawn towards it, he didn't want to push you.
Right, but it was also tempered with the fact that he decided that I was not a manifest talent. So, we'd sit at the piano, and I could read music when I was 3. I mean, I was reading words very young. And
did your father have a absolute pitch or perfect pitch?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm going to say the only people I know who been able to do that kind of mimicry.
Oh, yeah, no.
They'll hear 3 or 4 people talking, they can go right to the piano and just play it perfectly. That's the clusters they're hearing. And that is
a
manifest talent.
No, it has to be a manifest talent. You have to say it with a very thick Eastern European accent. But anyway, so I would say, oh no, let's go to Coney Island. So he'd say, okay, so we'd go. And I found the guitar when I was in Girl Scout camp because it was so social, and I would play songs and copy the counselors and sang folk songs. And then when I was 14, I was kind of bored of classical guitar and bored of folk guitar, and started playing with this band. And I just started listening to, things. I mean, I'd listened to the Beatles, but it never occurred to me that you could actually play the Beatles. I had, listened to the Animals, but it didn't occur to me that those songs were so simplistic you could play them blindfolded. Mm-hmm. So I started playing in a band that was playing a lot of, new wave and kind of, old British beat songs, and we started playing these, block parties and school dances and things. So that was the first music that was kind of the rock and roll. That's because these strings haven't been changed for maybe 20 years. I mean, this guitar has literally been in the closet.
Well, still, those wound strings have a little bit of extra grit when you pull them through the eyelet. One of the bands I remember seeing, the Ordinaires.
Yes.
Tell me about the Ordinaires.
Well, the Ordinaires, and I did play this guitar in the beginning of the Ordinaires. The Ordinaires was an instrumental band. I was the uptown girl in the downtown scene. I got a call to play in a precursor band because the guitar player, Joe, was going, he had to go home to Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And there was a gig at White Columns. And so I went down for the audition. At that time, I was playing in kind of funk bands and different kinds of music. I remember I showed up at the audition and I said, okay, play this. And I said, well, he showed me like some scratchy, strange rhythm sounds. And I was like, okay, any particular key? And he was like, nah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I got the audition. And then when Joe came back, I got to stay on with the band. It was super fun.
You got pretty much those teen years covered and into the new wave bands, but how would you describe your musical arc?
I went kind of from new wave to punk music, then I started with like disco and funk. And I think that one of my strengths as a player is actually my, as a rhythm guitarist in a disco or a funk band. I played in a lot of, different types of ensembles, but, I think that my hands are balanced. A lot of people I know have a very strong left hand, but maybe their right is not so strong. But because of all that music, right. I have that.
I have some people I know that are fantastic lead guitarists, but I wouldn't want them to be playing rhythm because they it's a very different kind of.
Yeah, and I think that is partially. I did a lot of kind of playing in different, all sorts of strange, music bands, meaning like klezmer and soca and calypso and kind of more, and I think that right hand work, that really set the ground for that. And then also I played bass for a while when I couldn't get guitar gigs. After the Ordinaires, I just, there was so many singer-songwriters who were like, play bass for me. And so that really kind of was directly, I think a direct access to that. I'm not a very choppy player. I did study with Emily Remler. I love her playing. She was so influenced by Wes Montgomery. Mm-hmm. And I love that classic style.
I myself, like music with lots of layers and texture. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you can't really have players who are particularly choppy. Otherwise, this turns into mud. There's too many things going on.
Right, but less is more.
But I much prefer, or sometimes more is more. Yeah. Less is less, too.
Yeah.
It's the idea that sometimes just finding just the right, it's about taste. It's about finding the right part that just fits in. It doesn't have to be the flashiest part in the world or this or that. Sometimes that's all that's needed, and it leaves room for other things to breathe around it.
Yeah, taste is really important. I think, showboating is overrated and taste is really important. That being said, there are, of course, some classical showboaters that I adore.
Oh, sure, but, a lot of these people are generally soloists.
Yes.
But when you try to get an ensemble together, that's been sort of the nature of my project, just get a bunch of lead players together and make them become members of an ensemble. That's been, sometimes tricky.
It can be tricky. It can be tricky playing in that group. What about Inky? Do you know who Inky is?
No.
So Inky is the octopus that escaped from the New Zealand Zoo.
Oh, really?
So I'm very interested I'm very concerned with ocean life and water. And it was very magical that it was in the New York Times and the Washington Post that Inky, this octopus, squeezed himself from the zoo back to the sea. And I thought that was very impressive.
Do they have any way of, tagging, or is there any way of keeping track of him, or they just know that he's just...
No, but there was evidence because there was suction marks like fingerprints, but there was suction things. And he squeezed himself down the drain.
Such was his desire to be free.
Exactly. One thing that the Ordinaires did for me is kind of disturb a little bit my ability to sing, meaning I became very interested in instrumental music, losing the interest in vocal music, which is unfortunate, I think, in the long run. And so I've been at a loss for actual composing. And so lately I've been composing works based upon the telephone numbers of my youth, and have done, I want to do a whole series. I've done 5 of them already, performed 3 of them, and they're duets. But what's exciting about them for me is that the emotions of what I'm playing or the thoughts that I'm thinking about are dictated by the numbers, which gives me some kind of like a semantic, a grounding. It's like words or what I want to say. But I don't have to say, I don't want to write these, lyrics. I don't like really singing lyrics or writing repetitive things, but if it's the numbers speaking, then it's kind of more interesting to me.
Yeah, I find a lot of lyrics out from a thesaurus. I like to find maybe like, a phrase, like a maybe, 4 or 5 word phrase that's well known, it's found maybe, let's say. And then go into a thesaurus and find all the different meanings of every one of those 5 words. And I have this like large body of text. Where
I like that.
There's one piece that we did for a lot of people's friend here in New York City, Jed Distler, ran a music series festival at here back in the day, and he wanted to do his sort of variations on 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Take one down and pass it around, 98 bottles of beer on the wall. Well, I always said, where I come from in the Detroit area, we always had a more fatalistic approach. If one of those bottles should happen to fall, 98 bottles of beer on the wall, and I sort of liked that because it's all if. You can take something down and pass it around, that happens. But if one of those bottles should happen to fall, it's all just purely conceptual. Nothing actually happens in the song. You're just saying, if this happens, if that happens, but nothing ever happens. And I just like the idea that, the sound of the smashing bottle and all that. So I just, out of those 6 words, if one should happen to fall, generated enough lyrics for like, a decent, 5 or 6
It's like a lullaby for an adult.
Yeah, but it was actually really aggressive, though. So. But it had a rather sweet ending, so that's good. But in the same way, I like finding, like what you're doing with the numbers, finding some way to keep some kind of a distance. And I also feel, too, that, there's people who dedicated their lives to this, never gave it up. So why am I going to jump into the game later in life and say, I'm going to start, doing lyrics, in the traditional sense? I'd rather do lyrics or find, these sources from means that aren't, being commonly used. Like what you're doing. That's your thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do love textures, and that's one thing I like about, playing in the big guitar group, where I do play a guitar that I bought for $99 that's named a California guitar. Who knew? That's a place where, all these sounds and textures, it's very 3-dimensional. A lot of funk stuff, like combining like some sounds that are like, really wet with lots of reverb against something that's just like dry as dust, coming right out of the, the opposite channel or even sometimes the same channel. And you can just really hear the difference in those 2 different textures. They can step on each other's toes a lot, like they can play in the same octave. They can rhythmically intertwine with each other, but because they have 2 different timbres that they're being recorded with, they still keep themselves distinct. Yeah, when I played in the Ordinaires, I played with, Joe Disney, and he always played a Strat or sometimes a Telly. So it was always a great sound because I was playing the Melody Maker or the Paul Reed Smith eventually. Mm-hmm. And when I played with Christian Migo, who's my other favorite guitar player to play with as a duo or something, he's a big aficionado of the Strat and the Telly.
Yeah, Telly especially.
Yeah, so I think it works well.
And as you can tell, for me, it's the low one.
For me, it's the high one. Mm-hmm. I know there's a way you're supposed to do it, and I'm not doing it that way.
Well, the only thing that matters is that you don't take off all the strings. You want to keep some tension on the neck.
Yes. What's the craziest place you've ever played, Patrick?
Well, I used to be pianist for a hair salon on 10th Street for a number of years. I was a receptionist, and I booked the appointments. Then when I wasn't doing that, they wanted me to play something, classical or classical inspired. So that was nice because the owner was a nice guy, and he collected pianos. So he had a couple pianos there. That's one place. I've also, played those weird after-hours clubs in the Alphabet City where pretty much like just junkies and prostitutes at 5:30 in the morning.
Ah, yes.
But that's a question I'd like to ask you. Unusual places you've performed.
Some of the strange gigs, let's see. I've done, I played with the Holland Ballet with the Ordinaires on top of a 10-foot scaffolding that was so shaky that, one of the amps fell off and smashed Fender Twin, and we had to gaffer tape everything.
Well, that's a heavy amp, a Fender Twin.
Yes, it fell off. It could have killed someone.
Yes.
But then we learned we had to gaffer tape everything down.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't have anything. You had to gaffer tape the music stands, your music, everything. We had to be barefoot because, otherwise you couldn't get up there and you'd fall down in high heels.
Right.
That's not an issue maybe for you, but for me, it's terrible. I remember when I went with my mother to see Spinal Tap. We went to the Ziegfeld Theater. I'd been on the road for a while, and I wanted to see the movie, so we went. And afterwards, my mother said to me, "Is that true?" And I said to her, Mom, it's kind of faked, but I've experienced every single incident in a parallel thing. From the Strange Riders to playing in a pizza parlor to playing... with bands with puppets.
Right. Well, one of the things I enjoyed when I first moved here was, and it's not so much the case anymore, but I remembered that one of the places I liked tapping into was all the theater companies on the Lower East Side, because they always needed composers, and they always needed, I don't know what that's like these days. It seems like a lot of the stuff that's being used, people, of course, would be using like their laptops a lot, as was I. But I think in the mid-'80s to in the 1990, pretty much you just had to have some instruments and people who could know how to read or write music.
You had to have actual people.
Yes.
I don't see a band now that has a full band. There are no full bands anymore.
It's like kids, three front men and a guy with a laptop.
And the laptop. And I have no problem with it, but it's from a musician power point of view, keeping live music active and keeping musicians working and, supporting the whole industry, it's just kind of tearing it apart from the inside. Mm-hmm. I know it does add a huge dimension and a huge sound and, of course, frees up musicians to, do much more of a, quote, show because they're not stuck at their instrument, or... But
still, it seems like the ones... who do that best have some kind of grounding and just acoustic playing, knowing how to play, knowing how things work acoustically. Otherwise, you're going to come up against a lot of walls. the strings are all done here. I think I might have to just check my tuning a couple times, bash out a few chords, because as you know, they like to stretch a bit. Whoa. Unintentional blues notes.
This guitar sounds great with new strings. Fabulous. What a great idea.
Yes.
I haven't looked at this guitar for years.
You don't need a new guitar. You just need to change your strings.
I know. Well, the problem is that it's not a reliable guitar because it's a little buzzy.
Yeah, okay.
A little buzzy.
So it's probably a great guitar if you're putting it through like a lot of effects to sort of cover that up. But if you're going for really clean sound...
Right, or if you're with, going quite loud, then it covers it up. But if you want to have, that quiet violin moment where you're out, then it's like... So you have to watch that.
Okay, then. So, now that our strings are already stretched, we should plug in. So what's the name of the piece we'll be doing today?
Perfect square.
Perfect square.
So one thing that I was always thinking about is with mathematical patterns that are so perfect, does it feel good to play them? And that's why I kind of chose something so simple.
Okay, so let's give it a shot?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll let that go out across the universe, and may it find you, Inky, wherever you are, sending you good vibes. So I want to thank you for being on the show. Thank you for the music.
Thanks, Patrick.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us. Our guest has been Angela Babin, and you can find out more about her on our website at stringsandthingsshow.com. The music in this show is from the Ordinaires, Homoerotic, and the Gotham Roots Orchestra. Special thanks to Vox Amps USA, D'Addario Strings, and Electro-Harmonics, New York City. I'm Jocelyn Gonzalez on the Zeros and Ones, and Patrick Grant is our host and axe wrangler. Strings and Things is a Pepper Green production for Headstepper Media. See you next time.